Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, dedicated to providing a safe space for victims and survivors to tell their rape or sexual assault experience as a step in their own personal healing journey or in helping others along on their journey. This platform is also devoted to explaining what it means to be trauma-informed and how important it is for each of us to know and understand the critical aspects of treating victims and survivors with a non-blaming attitude of belief, support, and empathy. I'm your host, Dave Markel, coming to you from the Long Valley Studio in Washington, Utah. This is episode 111, and my guest today is Jeanna Coursey. Jeanna reached out to me after a friend of hers, Bailey, was on this show. At the time Jeanna first contacted me, she wasn't ready to tell her story in this format, but she joins us now because she fully agrees with the mission and the goals of this podcast, and she's ready to help others through the telling of her story. Jeanna is helping to bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault, as well as to help normalize this type of conversation. Listen in as Jeanna describes the abuses, rape, and sexual assaults she endured while she was growing up and in her previous marriage. And I'll catch you on the other side. Here's Jeanna. Jeanna Coursey, welcome to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. It's been a long time coming. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
And that's an interesting aspect of you being here, saying that it's a pleasure. We were just talking about how Jeanna became familiar with this show and what her draw to the show was. And I'm going to ask Jeanna, if you would repeat some of that. Tell us about yourself. Tell us who you are, what kind of work you do, and then how it is that you found out about this show.
Okay. Well, I am a survivor of domestic violence, and I live in Napa County. I was brought here through my escape route. So this is where I landed when I escaped. It was very hard to overcome. I feel like I have two lives. That was my old life, and this is my new life. And my new life was wrought with a lot of overcoming of trauma, trying to raise kids that were traumatized, just going through systems and feeling like I fell through the cracks left and right. I was floundering at least for the first 4-ish years that I was in, I say, recovery. And then there was a time when I decided, and I remember this day actually vividly, that I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was coming out of my therapist's office and I was crestfallen, like my shoulders were down and my head was down. And I looked up and I saw this massage envy place in Napa. And I felt awful because everybody's telling me, you need to do this to recover. You need to do that. You need to go get massages. You need to take care of yourself. You need to, XYZ is going to help you. And here I am not able to afford XYZ. Neither do I have time to put towards what they call self-care. I'm caring for others. I have 4 kids that are in need of care. So I looked at the massage envy and I'm going to go in there and I'm going to ask them if they would donate some time to not only me, but other survivors of domestic violence or other survivors of any kind of violence. And from that moment, I walked in there, I asked for the manager. I was received well. They were like, oh, wow, that's a really great idea. You should talk to our manager. And they gave me the number. It didn't end up going anywhere. But the idea was born that I'm going to start an organization for the people who are like me, who have gotten all the services that are available to victims, but still feel like, oh, you're supposed to be better now. Like you're supposed to be a whole person. And everything that happened to you in the past is not supposed to be affecting you anymore. And you should be able to work and you should be able to navigate in communal situations and be social and have friends and be in a new relationship. All of these things you should just be able to do. At that point, once you have a house, you have food, all your basic needs are met. At that point is when I think the trauma is allowed to surface, right? Mm-hmm. That's when I was the most depressed. That's when I felt the most lost.
Yeah.
I needed that community that felt that way at the same time. and I needed a self-care plan or someone to hold my hand, or I don't know what it is, but like the idea of AA, where you have a mentor, someone who's gone through that and who can then say, you're going to be okay, and this is how we do this. So I kind of put that all into writing, and I did start a nonprofit organization. I started a nonprofit called Survivor's Worth with a few other people that I knew were on board with it, but it was basically like my idea. I'm the founder, basically.
Sure.
And then I realized I have no idea what I'm doing. I have a great idea. I think I've went through and written it all down, but I don't know how to raise money. I don't know how to write a business plan. I don't know how to talk to people. There's so much that I don't know. And I felt like if I start this and launch it, and then people now are relying on me like I was relying on victim services to do something for me, I'm going to let them down. And that's not okay with me. So I went to school and I got a degree in nonprofit management. I first got my associates and then I got my bachelor's.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I started volunteering with the News, which is the domestic violence and sexual assault organization that I work for now. But I started volunteering for them first. While I was going to school, I was volunteering and I was responding to crisis calls after hours. And starting the organization, going to school, and then responding and coming alongside others who were going through similar things was really what turned my life around. I was floundering before that, and then I was given purpose. I feel like I found what I was meant and made to do, and what makes everything that I went through in my former life worth it. I wouldn't change it now. Because
wow, that is so powerful, Jeanna. There's just not a lot of people who will say something like that, even though it may be true. They just won't admit it, because those are really tough words to say, that I wouldn't change my past abuse because of where I am now. That's a powerful transformation, and so inspiring and uplifting for those of us who are hearing this from you. It really does give a sense of hope and inspiration, as I just said, for anyone who's finding themselves in this type of situation. I just want to stop and say, first of all, I'm so sorry for the abuse that you endured, but thank you for the path that you took to get where you are. And I didn't mean to interrupt you. I hate interruptions, but I just got so excited right then. It was something I just needed to say. That is so impressive and commendable. Yeah, amazing. So go ahead, tell more.
Okay. Yeah, so after I went to school and I got my degree, I was hired at the same agency. So that's where I work now. And I work in development. So I do the grant writing alongside my director. So we tag team stuff, fund development, donor engagement. We just put on a big event that was successful and fun. A lot of work, but fun. And my favorite thing about what I do is outreach. I'm not the outreach person. We don't necessarily have one, but there was a grant that was available to target underserved populations, and we went for it. And we wrote into this grant, this is like my baby, this program. We wrote into this grant to target my town. So Napa is spread out. It's a big county, and there's lots of little outskirts towns. So we call it Up Valley, and then we have American Canyon, which is the small town. But it takes so long to get to Napa, especially when the traffic is bad. And people, myself included, when I first came here, it takes, hours by bus to get to Napa, to where all of the services are located. And it is often a huge barrier. People who live here don't necessarily go to Napa to get services. So we wrote this grant and we won it. And so I run this program that does outreach to my town. And so I get to do presentations and I get to do tabling events. There's a lot of interaction with my community and getting them to understand topics. But this is my favorite thing to do. Favorite part of my job is interacting with people, and then the aha moments, especially children. Like when we're doing outreach to middle school kids and getting them to understand the concepts that what is a healthy relationship, and watching their little brains work is so amazing to me. I came across your podcast through Bailey, and I worked with Bailey. She was our sexual assault victim services manager. Just one of the most special people I've ever met.
Boy, isn't that the truth? What a powerful soul she is. And for my audience, you can go back and listen to Bailey. She was a guest on this show, who I met through Carolyn Markel. Carolyn also is a regular guest. But Bailey is one of the executive directors now, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. You can correct me on this, Jeanna, of the LGBTQ Connection Napa.
I think that's her title. Yes, she's definitely up there, and she runs the LGBTQ Connection in Napa. Yes.
Yeah.
So proud of her.
She's amazing.
You know, that was also a transformation. Super proud of her.
And because of her, you and I got to meet. So that's another great thing.
Yeah.
I'm honored.
Her episode is the first time that I heard your show, and she had asked me to listen to it. And I loved it. It was like, I'd never heard anything like it before. And it just made me feel like compelled to listen to every other episode. So I just started listening from start to finish.
Wow.
Episode 1 all the way through. I don't remember what episode hers was, but I listened to every single one. Then now I look on Tuesday mornings, I get up and I, do my get ready routine, do my hair, take my shower and all of that. And I put the earbud in, and I really hope that you've already dropped the episode so I can listen.
Sometimes I'm a little late and I probably disappoint you, but it's always out there eventually on Tuesday mornings.
It gets there. I look forward to it. It's one of the highlights of my week.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I can't take that glory. It's the guests. It really is. It's the whole concept of letting people have a platform to tell their story and talk about their healing journey. And I myself had tried listening to several other podcasts, and I couldn't find one that met the criteria that I had in my mind for what this should be.
Yeah. I think it's, in my opinion, it's the perfect platform. Just the way that it's, I don't know what the right word is, but just the way it's formatted, how you are trauma informed. And so the way that you ask the questions in a way that is not pointed, the way that you allow for the person to continue on with their thought and not interrupting them or forcing them to go to a place where they're not comfortable going. That's one thing that I've noticed about others sexual assault related podcasts that I've heard are that they're really pointed sometimes, and they really push for, give me more details about that. Like you said, and many others, it's like sometimes those details are not available.
That's true.
And sometimes those details are going to send them into a place where they're not ready to go. And so I never feel discomfort while I'm listening, right? And I take that on for people when I'm watching them or listening to them. If they're uncomfortable, I feel it deeply. And so I never feel that when I'm listening to your podcast. So, so it's my favorite.
Well, thanks.
I love it.
It's an honor to hear you say that. I appreciate that, because that really is the goal, is to let the guest have control of that interview, talk about as much or as little as they want to talk about. And it's powerful. It speaks to people that way. And I appreciate you acknowledging that and mentioning it, because I want my listeners to understand what this podcast is about and why it is the way it is. And it is to let people know that there's ways to talk to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault in such a way that they do feel comfortable and not re-traumatized. If they want to go somewhere where it's a difficult thing to talk about, they get to decide how much of it they want to say and to self-determine their level of re-experiencing what they can or are willing to re-experience. It should never be something that is pushed for from the outside at all. And that includes law enforcement, investigators, prosecutors. It includes advocates and social workers and mental health workers. It's a critical aspect, I think, of what it means to be trauma informed. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Well, Jeanna, you did mention, and I'll tell my audience this too, that you were willing to talk about your sexual assault experience and your domestic violence. So I think at this point, knowing what we know about you, I feel comfortable in asking, what are you able to tell us about your experience?
Okay, so I have two that I'll highlight. I mean, I think when you're young, and you go through that, you're going to be set up for a series of others throughout your life, right? So there are others, but I'll just tell you the two main things, which is when I was little, my mom and my dad had separated. And when I was 5, we moved in with a woman who ended up being my mom's wife. They ended up getting married. This woman was awful to me. She was probably the worst human being in the world to me. And I think other people don't really have that experience with her. But for me, she was basically like a witch. And she came around and kind of took the place of my dad, who I wanted in my life. And in that whole thing, I became a very vulnerable young child. I was constantly looking for men, looking for a man to be in my life, looking for some sort of replacement. And it set me up for abuse. And Gail, who was my mom's partner, had previous marriage, and her sons ended up, they were adult sons. They were in my life. They're just family members. They're coming around all the time. And one of them, his name was Paul, he took to me like he was very complimentary. I was kind of like a chubby, ugly, sad child. And I was, made fun of in school. They didn't teach me about proper hygiene. So I was dirty, and I was just sort of like an outcast child. But he comes around and he calls me gorgeous. He says I'm beautiful, and he wants to spend time with me. And I just loved that. I ate it up. I really only remember one incident of actual touching, but my grandma used to say I was like a hypersexual kid. Like I would put things down there or be caught touching things. And knowing what I know now and looking back, I feel like there were more incidents that I don't remember. And it tracks, right, with the way that my mind worked within this situation and then how I remembered it later. So the event, my mom, I tried to tell her about this, and she doesn't remember it this way. She doesn't remember ever leaving me with him, but she did. I remember several times where I was left with him alone. They went somewhere. They went bowling, and I was alone with Paul in the house, and we were close, so it wasn't a big thing. He's like, come lay with me under this blanket. So I was like 9, I think, at the time. And I did. I went and laid with him under the blanket, and his hands just ended up around my chest area. I didn't think about that. I was starting to develop too. I had my period at 9, actually. So I was an early developer. So I was starting to get boobs, and I didn't really think about it. I mean, I didn't think about it being wrong that his hands were there, but he brought it up. He says, "Is this okay?" And I remember him constantly being like, "Is this okay? Is this okay?" And he's touching. And he ended up underneath my clothes. I remember he didn't ask, "Is that okay?" But I don't think I would have said yes. But he started fondling underneath. And so I felt like that was wrong. And it went on for I don't know how long until I said no. And I was struggling to get away, and he was doing the whatever, trying to get me to continue, but I was struggling, and I ended up screaming, and then he let me go. And then I ran outside and was able to get away from him, but he made me come back in. And I remember him sitting on the couch and me sitting on a different chair, and I was really upset, crying. And he said, shit, like it was almost like he snapped out of whatever he was in, whatever state he was in. And he's like, shit, I did it again. He said, you're going to tell your mom. You're going to tell your mom, aren't you? And I didn't say anything. And then he was like, you always do. And I remember responding, No, I'm not. Like, I was defiant. Like, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm not going to tell her. And it's funny to think back about what kind of state of mind I was in. Like, I should have totally told her. But because he did that, because it was like he knew what to say exactly to a child to get them to do something, right? It, like reverse psychology or whatever.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
So I didn't tell her. And I don't think I even remembered. It wasn't even a thing. I still wanted to be with him, like he's still my favorite person in the whole world. And I never told. But I remember one day when I remembered, because I really feel like I forgot about it because I didn't think about it for a long time.
Yeah.
But there was a day when I think I was 12 or 13, when I'm now starting to like lose the baby fat and I'm dressing in a different way. And like I, at that time, like in the 90s, it was like crop top with a flannel over the top and jeans. And so my belly button was showing and I was proud of it because like I had lost the weight, feeling good about my body, better about my body at least. And he was there and I came in and he grabbed my flannel and he like pulled it open. And the way that he looked at me, it's like that, like construction worker whistling at you look, that disgusting, it's almost like they're already inside of you look. And he looked me up and down and said, wow, or something like that. Like, wow, you're maturing. Wow, you're looking good, or something like that. And at that moment is when everything flooded back. I remembered it all. And I felt so disgusted, crawling in my own body. And all I wanted to do was, and that's what I did, is I took my flannel and I just covered myself up, closed it and turned away. And then I went to my room and I felt like I was in a tailspin. I was not okay. I was crying and nobody came to check on me. They didn't even know. So the day went on and nothing happened. And then he was gone and he called on the phone and I was still upset. And I said, I remember what you did to me. I remember. You can't call here anymore. You're not allowed to call here anymore. Don't call back. And I hung up and then he called back and I hung up on him again. I told him I was going to tell my mom if he called back, and he did call back. So I told my mom that day. It was like late at night and she knew I was visibly upset. And I told her and she kind of lost her shit. It was a big explosion. I don't know what I expected. I kind of expected her to protect me from him, but it turned into her going and fighting with Gail. They were in their room fighting and yelling and screaming, and I could hear Gail turning it around on herself. She was now the victim. Like, what do you want me to do? Disown my son? That type of thing. And it was kind of a tumultuous next few weeks, and then nothing happened. We didn't go to the police. We didn't confront him. We didn't do anything. From that point on, he wasn't allowed to come over anymore, but our other sons were. And there were other things that had happened, not as bad as that, not physically touching, but other things that her sons had done to me that made me uncomfortable. But it always felt like Jeanna like I made a big deal out of nothing. I was the exploder. For me, it felt like, how could we not be talking about this? Like, how could we not address it? How come you're not protecting me? And that was a huge sore subject for me my whole life growing up. And then later I found out that Gail she had 5 children and 2 of them were girls. And I found letters from one of her daughters talking about the abuse that they had suffered at the hands of their brothers when they were growing up. There was a lot of turmoil, so much turmoil. And I never, as a kid, understood why. And I always wanted to be around those girls. They were women. I was a girl. I always wanted to be around them, but they were constantly not talking to their mom, so I couldn't be around them. And then come to find out that's why they weren't talking to their mom, because their mom didn't protect them. Their mom didn't do anything. I mean, they were actually raped. 4 and 6 years old, and they've got boys doing this to their sisters. And when I found that out, it was bigger. Like, it was a bigger deal. Not only did you not protect me, you knew You knew that these people were capable of doing what they did to their sisters, to children, and you put a child around them. It's almost like you set me up, like you meant for this to happen. You knew. And so like that just sort of set the stage for my relationship with this woman for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
She never did anything physically to me, but she orchestrated it all.
Yeah.
And I had to live with that. I couldn't move out. I had nowhere to go. I didn't even know my dad. There was nowhere for me to go. It was like living through hell my entire childhood, being in that house. I think I've come to terms with it now, especially like I didn't talk to my mom for a long time, but now we have a good relationship, and enough, a surface level relationship. And I am able to forgive her and move on, forgive her despite the fact that we can't talk about these things. Like I could never go there with her. I can't go deeply there with her because it gets turned around on me. Like I'm making a big deal or she is the victim. And I can't, it just ends up being more hurtful when I try to have those conversations. So I don't, but I found a way because I want to have a relationship with my mom. I found a way to move on and forgive her for whatever it was that she was dealing with that caused her to not be able to protect me. We all have mistakes that we've made, especially when we're raising kids. There's a lot that we regret, we wish we could take back. So I try to remember that she's human and she was doing the best that she could. I don't know the trauma that she had in her life when she was young. So I can't really say I would do this, I would do that. I can, but like I can't put that on her.
Yeah.
And I do forgive her. It's harder to forgive Gail. She's dead now, but it's harder to forgive her, even though I know that she probably is also a victim of trauma, of abuse. It's a lot. It's a lot. It caused me to just kind of I needed to get out. I needed to get out of that house as quickly as possible. And so we moved to Galt, which is a little hick town in Sacramento County when I was 16. And I got a job at a pet hospital in Lodi. And I loved it so much. It was the best. I loved going to work. I also graduated high school at 15 and a half. So I wasn't going to school. I was only working. And I met it was a boy, I guess, like then. He was 18. I was 16, he was 18. So I met someone there and his name was Simon. And he was kind of like this, I don't give a fuck, macho, but not macho, not like in a showy way, just sort of like, like I own this shit. He walked around with his head back and his chest out, and I just was like so impressed by him because he was like nobody else. He didn't really show me any attention, but I really liked him. So I kind of put myself in his arena and we started dating. And he was, because of that like macho bravado type of thing, I mean, and he would throw down, like he was like so tough. And I felt like he could protect me, right? So I was like all in. And at first it was really, really good. He was just like everything that I could have possibly wanted. He treated me well. He said nice things about me. He built me up. We had amazing sex. And I just only wanted to be with him. Like it was all I wanted in life was to be with him. And I also wanted to get away from where I came from. So I moved in with him when I was 17. That was the beginning of the end. If I look back now, I can see some of the warning signs that I couldn't see then. Like I remember one time we were in a Taco Bell drive-through and I was driving and he was in the passenger seat and I was looking at the menu and he was looking at me. And then I looked back at him and he's got this pissed off look like, what the fuck? And I was like, what? Like what happened? And he said, what the fuck were you looking at? Like, there was someone, I guess, past the menu, like a man. There was a man past the menu. And so he thought I was looking at the man. Little things like that started happening that I should have probably run for the hills. And had I received some sort of education about it, maybe I would have. But yeah, we can't go back. But we ended up in a relationship. It was it was great. It was the cycle of violence. It was great. So amazing. I loved it. And then there would be tension building, and then there would be an explosion, and then it would be great again. And we went through that for years. So bad that I ended up breaking up with him for the period of like 4 months when I was 19. And I worked at Applebee's. I was a server at Applebee's. And he came to the restaurant. He did a drink and dash or dine and dash or whatever you call those. So he left. They knew I knew him. He drank a lot of drinks and then he left without paying. And I got in trouble for that. It was like this big scene. He would do stuff like that to get me in trouble. I ended up going back to him. I'm not sure why. After that, I ended up getting pregnant at 19. And so I had a baby at 20, our first. We moved in together, bought our own house. Things were okay for a little bit, but things would happen, other things. There were animal abuses. After our baby was 8 months old or something, he stopped working and he didn't work another day in the time we were together. He said it was because he didn't want the baby to go to the daycare and he wanted to take care of the baby. I was okay with that because I didn't want the baby to go to daycare, Like I wanted the baby to be taken care of by someone who loved him. And I'm trying to think of all the points where it's important, but he ended up getting pretty mentally ill. Now I know, looking back, that him not working was him receding from society, him becoming now a recluse. We had another baby in 2005, a girl. And at that point, he became even worse. His control over our lives, him being upset with me for anything that I did, it was like a paranoia about what would happen to our baby girl. Anything that I fed her, anybody that was around her, I was always putting her in danger in his mind. He ended up becoming so jealous of me. I had to work in order to be the breadwinner, right? I had to work. I was in title and escrow at that time, and there was a lot of events where I had to work after hours. I would have to wear certain things, formal attire to an event that we had, or be around realtors. He was always so jealous of the people that I would be around. And he ended up orchestrating this big scenario about me cheating on him, which did not happen. But there was one realtor that he was like, you did this and this and this with him. After that, things got way worse, and he became a horrible human being. He also became more mentally ill. This was also during a very hard financial time too, because it was during the housing crisis. 2007, there was layoffs in the title and escrow field. And I got laid off, and then we lost our house, and then always like this big thing, like, oh, let's move and let's do this, and then things will get better. So we moved a lot. Things would go downhill because he'd be upset with some neighbor or whatever. I don't know. There was a lot of different things. Things went downhill. Gist of the story is he just got severely mentally ill. We had another baby in the interim, and then we ended up moving to Stockton. My son, who then was 12, my daughter, who then was 9, and my baby, who then was 2, were held hostage, held captive in that house and not able to leave for 5 months. It was like not really a thing to neighbors because they didn't know us. We had recently moved there. I was working, and then he made me quit my job. And so my boss, who I was working with, ended up calling the police. The police came a couple of times to our house based on her phone calls. They would pull us out. She had a sense. I never told them what was happening, but they always had a sense that I was dealing with something I wasn't telling them about. My behaviors were weird. So when the police would come, they would just have us together. They never separated us. At the very beginning of us being held hostage, I was just sort of waiting for him to snap out of it. I was waiting for let's move or whatever, like the next part of the cycle. I was still sort of under the spell, and I don't think I would have said anything to the police. They were asking if we were okay, and I said yes. Then he ended up talking to voices, and he was having characters in his mind, and he wasn't sleeping. He wasn't eating. He would go through, like 1 week, he danced. He danced for a week straight. He played music loud at the top of the level of the speakers and danced and would not stop for a week straight. And I was worried about him. I loved this man, and for 17 years played his caretaker, his conduit to the world. And I cared. I didn't want to leave him, but at the same time, I was scared. Things were starting to get even worse than they were. He started saying things like he's being jumped. Like the entities that are hurting me, they're jumping into his body and making him do certain things. And so he would rape me. He would get physically violent, and then he would rape me. And then he would say that it wasn't him, it was so-and-so. In those moments when he was saying that it wasn't him, he would be so remorseful. And I felt so bad for him. I knew that he was dealing with something that was outside of his control. There was a time, probably the scariest moment, also one of the last interactions that we had before we were able to escape, where he was reading something on the internet and he just started crying and bawling hysterically. And I didn't understand why. So I went over to try to what's happening, comfort him. Is it okay? What can I do? And he just jumped up out of his chair and started yelling, Jesus fucking Christ, at the top of his lungs. I can still feel my eardrums rattling with the noise that was coming out of him over and over, Jesus fucking Christ. He started punching the wall and telling me what the fuck is going on and punching the wall. And I remember my big kids were in the back and my baby was clenching to my leg. He was terrified and crying. And I picked him up and I didn't know what to do. All I could think in this moment is I need to make sure my baby's okay. So I took my baby and I put him in the back room with the other kids. And I said, hey, you guys just lock the door. Don't let anybody in until I say it's okay. And if anybody gets through this door, then go out the window and run across the street and call 911 or whatever. I don't remember. I told them, get out. I shut the door and I went back out there. And this time he was bloody, just blood running down his arms. And he had foam coming from his mouth and he had a beard and long hair. And the foam was just, his beard was white and he's just crazy. He looked at me when I came out and stopped beating the wall, and he picked up this bat. It made him feel comfortable. It made him feel safe to have this bat. He called it the judge, and he kept it in the corner of the room, and he had taken screws, long screws, and screwed them through to make a battering ram out of this bat with screws. He picked that up, and he started coming towards me with it. And I looked at him. He's still yelling, what the fuck is going on? And I'm like, I don't know. And I'm backing up and he's getting closer and closer. And I remember thinking, oh God, please just let my kids be okay. Like, I'm going to die right now. Just let my kids get away. He just kept coming towards me and then he stopped. I don't know what happened to him, but he stopped and he dropped the bat and he said, you don't know, do you? And I said, no, I don't know. I don't know what's happening right now. And he went white and he sat down. And I gave him some orange juice because maybe his blood sugar's low. He's not eating, so maybe he just needs something. So I gave him some orange juice. He drank a little bit, and then he laid down, and he passed out. And I thought, okay, it's passed. Everything's okay. So I let the kids out, and he got up, and my daughter, she walked over to him, and she sat on his lap. And he grabbed her, and he wouldn't let her go. He was just rocking back and forth. She was getting visibly worried, I guess, maybe. She felt like something was wrong and she was wiggling and trying to get away and he wouldn't let her. And then as she's wiggling more, he finally just kind of did this big, let her go. And she kind of fell off his lap. That was the end of the whole scene. But later he told me that the voices were telling him that I was going to kill him and then prostitute our daughter, that I was going to traffic her, that the only way to save her from me was to kill her. And when he was holding her, that's what he was thinking, and that's what he was battling. And he always had knives on him, and he was very capable of doing that. And so it became apparent to me at that time that we were not going to make it out of this alive, that he was definitely going to kill us one way or another, that he was strong enough to withstand the voices telling him to do something then, but he acted upon it. And so how could I be sure that he wouldn't do it later? And I think at that moment, I knew I needed to get out. I needed to get away. And I had a sense that I was pregnant as well. There were a couple other incidents after that before we were able to get away. But at that point, I was talking to the kids because they were old enough. And so I was talking to them and trying to get them prepared to leave. We were going to have to do it on a moment's notice. And I was going to have to say, go, it's going to be go time. So wear 2 layers of clothes and put one thing that you want, put it near the door, because you can only take one thing, one small thing. It was really hard. It was easy for my oldest son because he was experiencing child abuse as well. But my daughter, she loved her dad and she worried about him and she knew he was sick and she didn't want to leave. And so it took me a little while to convince her that it was okay to leave him. That's a hard thing to do. It was hard for me to choose my children's lives over his. It was such a hard thing to do. But I think it was probably even harder for her. And I think she still, to this day, bears a little bit of guilt for it. She worries about her dad. It's been 10 years. We celebrated 10 years on September 28th this year.
Wow.
That type of guilt, it lasts. And I think my older kids still think about him and worry that he's okay. But we had to choose life. We had to choose life or die there with him. I wanted to tell you about, since we're talking about law enforcement a little bit ago, that last time we had an interaction with law enforcement when we were still with him. He was having an episode and he had turned on the music really loud and he was naked and he went outside and he was in the street dancing and yelling at the neighbor's house that he was going to kill him. It was 5 or 4 or something. It was super early in the morning. It was dark. I don't think anybody saw this, but while he was outside, prior, he had already cut off our communication. So I didn't have a phone. Our phone was not connected to service, our landline. So I knew, though, that you could plug in a phone to a jack and still call 911. So I plugged in. We had this old rolled up, I had to untangle the cord, phone in the closet up high. And so I was able to get that down and plug it into a jack. And I called 911. And I was stupid because I didn't know that they could locate you by your address. They knew what address you were calling from. I called and I was whispering and I was hoping that he was still outside. And I was like, someone's naked outside and I need you to come. They're like asking me questions. I don't remember what they asked me, but I was not giving them any information, hoping that they wouldn't know who I was or where I was calling from, just that someone's calling because there's a man outside naked and threatening the neighbor. Oh, he also had a machete, by the way. Anyway, I hung up the phone and then I saw the police come and they were like riding down. We had like this we lived in a rural neighborhood. So they were driving down the street and spotlighting in yards. They spotlighted right at mine. So then they come up to our gate and I was so terrified that they were going to say or see him and say something about me to him, that I was going to get in trouble for calling the police. And so I ran out and they're like, someone called 911 from this number. And I was like, shh, don't tell him that I called, please. And they're like, well, what's going on, ma'am? Their tough way that they talk, what's going on, ma'am? I tried to just say, you can't tell him, And then he comes up from behind. He had somehow got into the yard, put on a robe. He was normal now. He was a sane-looking human being with a robe on, and he didn't have a machete anymore. They're like, is that your husband? I said, yes. They came into the yard. One of them took him about 10 feet. So we're still within earshot. And they're asking him questions, and he's telling them, I was out in the yard. Yeah, I saw someone with a backpack or something, and I was just going to investigate. And they're asking me if I'm okay. And I'm saying, yeah, he's just acting crazy. He's acting crazy. And I'm trying to be quiet about it, but I can't tell them everything. I can't tell them that I'm not allowed to leave. And now my baby's crying and he's inside at the door. And so I'm like freaking out, like, I have to go. And so I didn't tell them anything. I told them only that he was being crazy, that didn't raise any suspicion. That was the third visit to our house, and I called, and I'm being so weird. I am being evasive. I am not giving them all of the information. I told them that he was naked, that he was in the street, that he had a machete. Like, I told them all of that stuff on the phone call, and still they didn't push. That moment could have been the moment that could have saved us. They didn't do anything. So I had to go back into the house with him, and I was so scared that he was going to know that I called. I don't think he did. I was like, what was that about? I put on a good show. Like, whoa, what happened? What was that about? And he said, they know I'm going crazy. And it was over. But that was, I don't know how long, days before we were able to leave. And so one day when he was sleeping, I said, okay, guys, because he didn't sleep very much. So it was like, you have to take the opportunity when it presented itself. And I told the kids, okay, we got to go. And we ended up walking in the streets of Stockton. I don't know if you know Stockton, but Stockton is not a safe place. We did our best to just walk and turn and get into a neighborhood and just get lost. That was what my point was to get lost. I ended up finding some lady that allowed me to use her phone, and I called the one phone number she was my boss at my last job, and she came to get me and the kids. She took us to American Canyon in her house. She was older and had a cat and no kids and white carpet, but she took us into her little tiny 2-bedroom house, and she saved our lives. She hid us here for a while, got us connected with news, and we were able to get a basic needs met, getting connected with food stamps and cash assistance and gift cards, Walmart and stuff like that. Got my kids enrolled in school, and I was pregnant, so dealing with that. I ended up going into the hospital because my baby was falling out. There was doctor said it was like a 3-millimeter wall between my bladder and my uterus. So my uterus and my bladder were falling out of my vagina. And so I had to stay on bed rest, be in the hospital for 2 weeks. And I had my baby at 30 weeks, which they took by cesarean because they said that if he kicked through my uterus, that it would surely kill me. And so it was like weighing whether or not to let him mature and get more viable or take him now and for sure I'll live. That was a hard time because my kids were basically alone that whole time. And because of the situation that we had come from, they had to lock down the hospital, and I was not allowed to have visitors. So I was on I don't know what they call it, but it's a security risk, basically. A person who is only allowed to have 2 people on the list that can come visit. And when people call, they don't say that you're there because of the domestic violence situation. Yeah. So basically, I wasn't able to see my kids. I could talk to them on the phone, but they were with the lady who had taken us in. And, they didn't know her either. They only just met her when we came here. So they lost their home, they lost their dad, they lost their mom, all in the course of a few months. Yeah, it was pretty rough. It was traumatizing for everybody. And in that time when I was in the hospital, I didn't want to put in a restraining order the whole time when we were here because I didn't want him to know where we were. I wanted it to be a secret. That I didn't want him to know that even that we were in Napa County. So I was afraid to file anything. But when I was in the hospital, the doctors were very clear that this will likely kill you. They let me know that. I had to be very, very careful. I could not even cough. I wasn't allowed to be off of the bed for longer than 5 minutes, like going to the bathroom. But it was that serious where this will kill you. And they did not have a good prognosis. They were not hopeful. They did not give me any hope that I was going to make it through this. What we were doing was very risky. Keeping him in for 2 weeks was super risky. And I was lucky that I wasn't dead already. So I'm thinking that I'm going to die and I have to protect my kids because if I die, they're going to go back to that monster. He's going to have custody of them. And so now it's crunch time. I do have to do the restraining order and I do have to file DA good cause and I do have to do all of the things that I was avoiding. And so that 2 weeks was very busy. Even though I was just in a hospital bed, I was making phone calls. I was working with a lawyer, getting all of the paperwork ready, doing the victim statements, doing all of the things that I needed to do in order to file for the restraining order and hopefully protect my kids. Like I was writing a will. It was very clear what my wishes were for them, because if I can't get the restraining order in place, then something else I wanted to fail safe, or something that talked about what happens with these kids. I was very fortunate. The lawyer was able to file the restraining order on the day that I gave birth. That morning. It was like 8 something. It was filed, and I gave birth at 10 something.
Wow.
I remember going in there feeling like being wheeled into the operating room and feeling like it's okay. It's okay if I die right now, because I did everything that I could to make sure that they were protected. They're with someone who is going to care for them. And that's all that I can do. I did everything that I could possibly do to protect them. And I went in thinking, being pretty scared, but also at peace, and looking at the light as I'm falling asleep and thinking, okay, it's you and me, God. It's you and me. And when I woke up, I was surprised, but also it was a very interesting feeling of the chains are gone. And I don't know why or how that happened, but I distinctly remember how free I felt when I woke up, like I had been given new life. And that's not the end of the story, obviously, but maybe the beginning.
Jeanna, I remember when we first started talking months ago, and I think initially what I remember is you just saying, I just want you to know how important this podcast is to me. And I think I reached out back and said, I would be very interested in having you as a guest on the show, and you saying, I'm not ready. I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
And now I've heard this story and I'm thinking, wow, I can surely sense that this is such a heavy trauma-based story and experience that you saying I'm not ready yet now in retrospect makes such perfect sense. But I'm thinking also at the same time I'm listening to all this, that wasn't that long ago. And here you are telling your story. Are you able to share with us how many other people you've talked to about this story or told this story to?
I think it's bits and pieces. I think there's a few people in my life that know a lot. There's a few people that only know that I've experienced violence and escaped it and have overcome. I do community talks. So there are some parts of it that I'll share that are relevant to whatever the talk is about. And I am always trying to be, I don't want to say I use it, but whenever I'm talking to a group, I'm thinking about them and what I'm trying to get across to them. And so I'll utilize bits of the story that will make that goal possible. And so if one of them was me just going to a group and saying, we need you to support us by making go bags. And I told the story about when I came here and how awful it was and how important the go bag was to me when they gave it to me.
Right.
So there are bits and pieces that have been sprinkled, but I don't know that I've gone even this deep with anybody. I've written about it. The one part that I told you that with the bat, that part, I wrote a piece. I was in a creative writing class when I was going through school. And I wrote in detail, I named it Violent Schizophrenia, and basically told that whole part or that whole scene, because we were supposed to expound upon a scene. I don't remember what the prompt exactly was, but we were supposed to give details about a scene. And that was one that I could remember so vividly that it was easy to write about. And I did submit it to like a magazine, but it wasn't published. That was hard to do. Because
I'm sure.
I think even now, even with this podcast, I still battle with him being mad that I'm talking about what happened in our home. like I still hear and feel his watchful eye.
Yeah.
Like it still controls me a little bit, but then I'm like, no, you cannot control me anymore.
Uh,
You know?
I love that. I'll tell you, the reason I asked that question is because you tell the story in such an impactful and strong and sure way. It's impressive to me to have as a guest somebody who has been as traumatized in such horrific ways as you have, who then can take that and share it in such a way that, yes, it's hard to listen to for a lot of audience members, maybe, but that for you, I hear strength, I hear growth as you talk. The way you started the story compared to how you ended the story, your tone is different, your confidence level is different, your projection is different, your persona is different. I just see this extremely strong, capable person coming out of this really miry, yucky, horrific place, but doing so with such strength and power and intention. And I just want you to know that I see it, I hear it, and I am so impressed by it, and I appreciate it. I appreciate it more than I can ever say, because that is what this platform is for. And I am so thankful that you took advantage of it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I am convinced, as I am with so many of my guests, that we could sit here and talk for hours and hours and hours about what it means to go through that kind of trauma, what it means to react the way we react, and why certain things happen. That whole concept of you whispering to the dispatcher and then telling the police when they arrive and they're asking, are you the one? And you're shushing them and wanting them to stop. That's fear. And that fear is based in the knowledge of the depth of his mental illness and the impact or the risks that you are exposing you and your children to and all of that. And I think people just hear it sometimes who aren't trauma informed as just a story. And it's not. It's a life or death situation when you shush the police. It means I could die right now, and you're not realizing that. And there's so much to talk about in terms of what the police do in these situations that are, I hate disparaging the police because I was one, and I remember doing those kinds of things, but it's such a lack of education. It's such a lack of knowledge about the dynamics of domestic violence and rape and sexual assault. There's so much that needs to be done in the educational world for law enforcement, as well as advocates and medical personnel and prosecutors. And there's just so much to do. But I think I think I'm going on and on, but I think the whole impact that I'm trying to make for you is that you are doing those things that need to be done by being here and sharing this story. It means so much to so many people, including myself. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I can sometimes take that to heart, and then other times I feel like I'm not enough. I've not done enough. I've not grown enough. I'm not healed. There are times when I'm just like thrown back into, I feel like I take steps backwards depending on the situation, and I don't feel strong. I think that's probably just the nature of the beast, right? Like that's just...
Absolutely. And I was just about to say that, but I appreciate you saying and admitting that sometimes you feel those things, that you're not enough, that you haven't healed, because other victims and survivors feel that same feeling. And I think that commonality needs to come out. We need to normalize this conversation, because admitting that is part of the growth that is necessary in the healing process. Being vulnerable like you are, by saying, I don't feel like I'm enough. I don't feel like I've done enough. I don't feel like I've healed enough. And it hurts and is scary to talk about these things. Thank you, because other people need to hear that they're not alone in that.
Yeah. I think it is normal. And everybody that I've had experience with is in the same boat. It feels so hard though not to beat yourself up when it's happening to you. It's easy to give compassion to other people. It's easy to say, "Hey, I hope that you're giving yourself some grace." It's easy to say that to other people, but when you're going through it, it's, I don't know, I feel like we can be blinded by our own internal chatter, and it's like so cloudy you can't see the sun. I was talking to my daughter about it just the other day, actually, and we were talking about more about it in the sense of like the menstrual cycle and how we're batshit crazy, and then we realize that we're batshit crazy for a reason, and we know that it'll be better tomorrow. But I feel like that's something that we can always kind of rely on when we're in the midst of it. If we can just hold on to the, it's not going to last forever, or just give it a week, you're going to be okay, things will start looking up, because it is that way. It's always cyclical, and sometimes it lasts a little longer than others, but there are good times on the other side of this. You're going to be stronger because of it. You're going to be able to help people because of it. And if we can just grasp onto that, I think those are the little nuggets that get us through, right?
Yeah.
At least for me, that's how I've not drowned. Yeah.
Yeah. Not given in. And that there is hope and strength in telling your story. Yes, you are helping others. And I appreciate you. It means the world to me, as I just said, that you are even here doing what you're doing. Jeanna, you know from your education, though, and from your therapy, that the way the brain works, when you talk about these things, then it's all right there in the forefront. It's going to be for the rest of today, and you're going to look back on this and say, wow, did I do the right thing? Should I have done this? But I can assure you, you did the right thing, and that it is strength and power to others to hear your story. But I have to ask, are you willing to talk to us about what you do to handle those explicit memories that are right there at the forefront, and the implicit memories that will now then kind of expose themselves to your cognitive brain, things that you hadn't remembered that now you will, and it'll bring old stuff back to the surface? What will you do to help take care of yourself and move forward and handle those thoughts?
Well, I do go to therapy still regularly, so I will definitely be exploring it with my therapist. Today, I'm going to take care of my basic needs. I think I get worse when I don't. So I'm going to make sure that I drink enough water. I'm going to make sure that I get a little bit of exercise, and walking is always helpful. My therapist always kind of beats that one into my head. Like, you're doing, what do they call it? What's that bilateral side of the brain stimulation, EMDR. You're doing a little EMDR when you walk, because it's the bilateral stimulation. Yep. So walking has been and is a helpful tool for me when I'm not feeling okay. It does ground me. I love the sun. So sitting in the sun, soaking it up, being in the backyard on the grass with no shoes. I have animals. I love my animals. I think that's another thing. My cats. I think that just, their fur. I have one cat. His name is George. And he's my favorite. If I was a witch, he would be my familiar. But I pick him up and I bury my face in his belly, and he purrs. So I just lay my ear on his chest and I listen to his purr. Yeah. And that's so soothing to me. It's just such a connection, and so soothing, in the noise and the feeling and the soft and it being on my face and the smell. Being in the senses is always helpful too. So maybe I'll take a nap.
Yeah, sleep is an amazing healer of that immediacy of trauma too. And that's why I do this, is to bring us out of the immediacy of the trauma that we've just experienced and talked about, and put us in a futuristic mindset of, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And all the things that you just mentioned that you're going to do takes us from the presence and the immediacy of what we just talked about into a place where we can let our minds feel more comforted. And I'm going to hold you to those things, Jeanna. And I'm going to be texting you later this afternoon and this evening, making sure that you are taking care of yourself, because it's important to me that you do take care of yourself. And I'm so impressed with how you have taken care of yourself so far, and want you to recognize that even sitting here having this discussion with me is taking care of yourself. It's a healing, growth, prospering process.
Yeah, I think so. I feel good about it. Yeah.
And that makes me feel good. Absolutely. You are one of several guests who have expressed that. I feel good about having done this interview.
Yeah.
It's powerful stuff. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's plan on doing it again. You think you could do that?
Yeah. I think there's a lot more that we can drill down into. This was very much obviously it's not everything, right? There's a lot, there's so many more subjects. Like if we want to talk about law enforcement, we could drill down into those interactions.
We need to. Yeah, absolutely.
And falling through the cracks and dealing with service providers and making new relationships. There's so much that comes as a result of, or so many, aspects of the healing process that are important to talk about too.
Absolutely. So, yeah, for sure. And I look at it as an opportunity to educate. And I appreciate the educational process that you are helping many hundreds, if not thousands of people go through as they listen to your story. Well, I will be in touch. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me this afternoon.
Again, my pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I believe that everyone who hears this episode will agree that Jeanna has shown immense strength and fortitude in coming on this show to tell her survival story, and that she continues today to exhibit that strength through what she continues to do for her family and in her work. Jeanna, it truly is an honor to have you as part of the SAS family. And to you, my audience, please be sure to tune in next week for another episode in our ongoing efforts to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. If you've just recently joined me here on the Sexual Assault Survivor Stories podcast, thank you for being here. I would greatly appreciate it if you would take just a quick second to give this show a rating and to subscribe to SAS. Every new subscriber and positive rating helps promote this show to others, and in turn helps bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. So thank you for your support. If you're a regular listener to this show, thank you for your loyalty and ongoing desire to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. Please reach out to others and share this podcast with them. If you haven't done so already, it would be extremely appreciated if you would go to the new Sexual Assault Survivor Stories page on Instagram and click that follow button. Being an Instagram follower of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories also helps further the mission and goals of SAS and provides the opportunity for more people to have access to the site and to this show. Thank you in advance for following. Please remember to start by believing whenever you encounter a victim or survivor who's reaching out for support in telling their rape, sexual assault, or interpersonal violence experience. And let's all do our part to normalize these conversations, because we all know someone whose life has been impacted by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.